Hello everybody and welcome to ChessDiagnostic. This is Andrew. I'm back with a game from the Aeroflot Open here. I know the World Chess Championship's going on, but that's rather a bore fest in my opinion. It's just draw after draw, and you see the players aren't taking any risk, which is understandable because it's only 12 rounds. But still, I'd rather not watch that or analyze those games. There's been some amazing games going on in the Women's World Chess Championship. And I found this game just today. I was looking at some games from the Aeroflot Open, and this is by Grandmaster Anton Korobov against the Iranian upcoming talent Parham Magsudlu. Obviously, that's not amenable to my tongue, but let's get into it. So Korobov is white, and he plays really unconventionally. This game is, in my opinion, it's totally crazy how he's playing. So d4, knight to f6, c4, and after g6, knight to c3, and d5, we're going to the Grunfeld. And we see a rather interesting line here with bishop to d2, just developing that bishop. And it's a rather weird way of playing, I'll say. But obviously he has something prepared here, some home preparation. A lot of these moves in this game are not the computer's first choice, but there is a cohesive strategy that he follows. Alright, so just developing the bishop, and then we see takes, and then e4. A very standard operation in the Grunfeld. Now if black takes this knight here, then it just strengthens this white center, and black's strategy is normally to eventually get in something like c5, and use this dark square bishop to undermine the center from afar. But he doesn't do that. Black just moves the knight back, and then we see bishop to e3, protecting that pawn. So obviously bishop to d2, it looks like, I don't know, just some, you could say some high-level grandmaster stuff, but I don't really think that's what's going on. I think he just played it from his own ideas. I won't necessarily say if it's a good move or a bad move. It just is. So castles, and now we see bishop to b5, which was actually the recommendation of the computer. Now the interesting idea about this move, of course, he can chase the bishop back here and then bishop to e2. But the interesting thing is if we see something like c6, like here, and then bishop back, then actually this knight has some trouble developing, as well as this rook, and the queen side is a little stunted. So that appears to be the idea of bishop to b5. Instead of just playing bishop to e2, he gives some ideas of preventing development for black as well. Instead, we see bishop to e6, and then knight to f3. And now here's where it gets really interesting. So this knight can cause a lot of problems, and we see trades, takes. The interesting thing is after the queen comes here and bishop back, white can't castle. But it appears that's not his plan. He actually has a deeper idea of not necessarily castling queenside, but simply eventually moving the king out of the way and just starting a kingside attack right away. And that's what we see with h4. Now, another idea that makes sense as well in this position is to play something like b4. Obviously, just preparing to play something like b5 and castle and get a standard normal position. But that's obviously not what Korobov is going for here. He's trying to play very energetically and creative. So after something like c6, we'd see queen to b3, obviously preparing a4. And now, after these moves, basically white could castle kingside and just play in the center. But let's go back here. So that wasn't the game continuation. We see h4. And now, after h5, playing very energetically and aggressively, he simply takes. If he takes here, basically it loses pretty quickly if black doesn't play completely accurately. So instead we see c5, just attacking the center. But let's look at what would happen if the pawn takes. So after these moves, basically black has to give his bishop away, and if he doesn't, so he gives the piece back. And at the end of this line, obviously white is a lot better. The black pawn structure is destroyed. White has targets to attack, as well as easy development, and black is lagging in development, as well as white having this strong pass pawn too. So white definitely has much better chances in this endgame. So we don't see that. Another option or idea that I analyzed was if the bishop goes back, then we see something like this. And after a couple moves and castles, then obviously white has a very strong attack. He can play here, just bring the rook in, just move pawns. There's so many attacking chances, and it's actually rated as +6 for white here. You look at the general understanding of this position, and there's zero activity for black. There's really no chances of any counterattack or counterplay even, and his development's too slow. Alright, so let's go back. This is a very complicated game, but it's very interesting how it develops here. Alright, so Parham just decides to strike back in the center. The knight comes back, and now we see a very interesting volley of moves chasing all the way pieces back. So b5, queen goes back, b4, knight goes back, and now the knight develops. So the Iranian Grandmaster actually dealt with this situation very well, developing his pieces, chasing white back, and that's what you want to do in these kind of dynamic positions if you're behind in development and your opponent is attacking you. You want to try to find a way to either play on the other side of the board or at least volley their attack if you can. Alright, so we see d5 and then knight to a5, and now there's a very interesting idea for black to just play on the queen side, use this dark square bishop, and play c4 eventually, which could be a very dangerous counterattack against white. So white sees here that he definitely doesn't want to castle here on the king side. He's trying to attack there, but also it's going to take white quite some time to get these pieces out. So what he does is he follows their correct strategy and plays b3. Now, obviously, he doesn't want to just take this pawn and open up the queen side for black, but he also doesn't want black playing c4, getting a passed pawn, and using his dark square bishop to cause lots of problems. So he plays b3 and actually invites the trade of his rook for this very powerful dark square bishop. And after a couple moves, takes, we do see this trade, which maybe wasn't the best idea, but it's a very powerful idea for white because now the queen is controlling this dark square diagonal. Black basically has a worthless knight over here. And it's interesting how these strategies play out that seem very simple upon analysis, but to actually play these is really hard. But it makes perfect sense because he's really trying to attack on the king side, white is, and he doesn't want to allow any counterattack by black, and material is quite relative in these positions. Alright, so we see the queen come up, and now white just starts using his minor pieces to get active. Check. Now even the king comes in to play some supporting role in the king side attack. Now check. And then obviously just pushing pawns. He wants to maintain the tension. If black starts taking these pawns, that actually just rather helps white to further advance his kingside attack. And now after c4, we do see this kind of weakened idea, but it doesn't really hold much weight now. We see queen to b1, preparing a discovery on the king, as well as supporting this b3 pawn. So after takes, we do see takes back. Now, there is this discovery, but after the king goes back, you see that black is threatening here and also to take here, which again would give black counterplay and some chances. So we don't see that at all. Rather, he just takes and resumes his attack after this move. Now we see the discovery takes, and then the knight takes, preparing another discovery. So black is trying to counterattack, but he just doesn't have the piece coordination. The queen is over here, rather useless, as well as this knight. And now we see the very interesting move, rook to d1, supporting the pawn, but mainly preventing the queen from coming in and getting active, as well as threatening this knight. So it looks like also a thing that I noticed was that it looks like the knight and the bishop, as well as the king, are supporting this pawn and the kingside attack well enough that white can activate his least active piece. The queen is sitting over here, rather active on this diagonal against the king, but there's really no good moves for this rook. It's not really doing anything. So he just plays rook to d1, controlling the important d3 square, as well as supporting this pawn. The queen comes back, and then we see the beginning advance of these pawns. Trying to close off the b1 to h7 diagonal, and then we just see the king start to come in. And now we see some desperation. There's really no point of trying to bring this knight in. Obviously, he's preparing to, that's why the king moved out, because he's preparing to take that rook. So he just gives away the knight. And again, we see the same issue, check. Now discovery check, also preventing the check from black. And then after the centralizing move, queen to e4, we see just a couple more moves. This is a really interesting move, obviously threatening here, but it really doesn't do much after here. If the rook takes, so we just see king back. There's no way to prevent the queening of this pawn, even if the queen takes. They just trade. If the queen comes back, we just queen. And actually we see check, and then after king to h4 resigns, because there's just nothing that can be done. After here, we see he's going to be mated soon enough, as well as these centralized pawns. Oh, we can look at the analysis here, just to see how he would mate. So he'd slowly bring his queen in, check, and then either the queen could take. If the rook takes and he tries to hang on to his queen, we see check. Either the queen takes, or if he tries to move, we see mate in 3. A very interesting and dynamic game that we're not seeing in the World Chess Championship, but you will see in the Aeroflot Open. Alright, so again, I'm back on this channel trying to get back into the swing of things. I have been making some analysis. Where did my book go? Grandmaster Ram. I've been working on those endings, but I really want, it's kind of a timeless series, so I don't want to just pump it out and have any mistakes in it. But I will be getting those out soon enough, and I thank you for your patience, and happy Thanksgiving and holiday weekend. So I'll see you in the future, and I'll be back probably on Monday. All right, bye.